Monday, June 27th, 2022. I'm Larissa, and I am reading the novel I wrote, Luck of the Draw, starting with chapter 5. Now, I wrote this for today's video. I wrote this during the autumn of 2020. Yes, that is when this was written. Luck of the Draw by Larissa Dahroug, an original work of fiction. Chapter 5. Believe it or not, I married a rocket scientist. It was nearing dinner time and Amy was still in the ER. A social worker had interviewed Amy both before and after the rape kit was administered, and the doctor had ordered an extensive list of tests to try to figure out what Amy had been given. She had been informed she was very lucky to be alive. So far, they had identified fentanyl, Percocet, and methamphetamine in her system. The doctor also suspected MDMA or possibly ketamine, but it was impossible to know for sure since the assault happened on Saturday and it was now Tuesday. The amount of drugs that were still in her system was more than enough to kill a person Amy's size, especially someone who wasn't accustomed to taking such drugs. Amy told the doctor she was sure Reiki had saved her, Reiki in the hand of God. In reality, Amy didn't see much difference between the two. In her 15-plus years, she had been practicing the ancient healing art. She had come to understand it as a gift from God. The doctor was skeptical, but acquiesced she had no better explanation. After examination, it was found that she had a head contusion, 2 broken ribs, a sprained right wrist, and had been both vaginally and anally penetrated, in addition to the puncture wounds, where they most likely had administered the majority of the drugs. The doctor had asked if she remembered eating or drinking anything that had not been in her possession at all times, because in most of these cases, MDMA or Rohypnol or other similar drugs were given to victims that way to incapacitate them during the assault. Amy had no memory of eating or drinking anything on Saturday other than a cup of tea and slice of toast at breakfast and a granola bar she had brought from home around noon. The cut along her labia and arm had most likely been made by a knife of some sort, and the hair on her vulva had oddly been removed with a depilatory cream. That's what was on the back of her shirt. They had used her shirt to wipe the hair from her vulva. No semen was detected. The doctor explained to Amy that it wasn't uncommon that a sexual predator did not ejaculate. It was also possible that they had used a foreign object to violate her, or a woman had assaulted Amy, though the latter was unlikely given the other facts and events of the past few days. The social worker had told Amy that sometimes survivors of such attacks would have some type of flashbacks with images or sounds or smells in the weeks, months, or even years following an attack, and suggested she keep a notebook close by to write down anything she might remember. The last thing Amy could remember before waking up on Tuesday was locking her office door. After that, everything was just blank. They, of course, had also checked for STDs. There was no indication of exposure to HIV, so at least there was that, but the full panel results were going to take a day or two to get back. Tubbs wasn't allowed in the room for the exam or meeting with the social worker, but he had stayed at the hospital anyway, coming back in the room to sit with Amy whenever he was permitted to do so. Amy was grateful. Her parents were both living, but they lived back east, and they rarely spoke, not even on Christmas or her birthday. Amy's brother had joined the Marines and was overseas somewhere as far as she knew, but she hadn't spoken with Dale since before he left for boot camp, and he was career military now, not just a peon recruit. Once every couple of years, he sent a greeting or postcard with a sentence or two, but that was it, and he never included a return address. Amy didn't know any of the rest of her family, and most of them that she knew of lived in Canada, France, and one in Turkey. But she wouldn't know them even if she were shown a photo. She didn't do social media, and her work was her life. When she wasn't with clients, she was reading, doing research, writing, or hanging out with Liza. And it wasn't that Amy didn't like people. It was just that she preferred being alone and working at her own pace, on her own terms. Once every 2 years, she took a 1-month trip. When she traveled, Dee Dee took care of Liza for her. Dee Dee was her longest-standing client. They had been working together for almost 20 years. He was the one who told her about Reiki, and the two of them had done Reiki 1 training together. Excuse me. Excuse me. Dee Dee hadn't been interested in continuing any further with Reiki training. He was happy to be able to do Reiki for himself and had never wanted the responsibility of working with others. Dee Dee was probably the closest thing Amy had to a friend. When people found out what she did for a living, they either were fascinated or total disbelievers, and both ends of that spectrum caused problems. So, she kept the majority of her relationships on a professional level. Dee Dee was the only exception, but even so, he wasn't the type of friend she was willing to call in this situation. Tubbs was practical and helpful and treated her the way she wished her own father would. She hadn't actually thought of Tubbs as a friend until this moment, sitting in the overlighted ER, beaten, bruised, and scared. Tubbs just sat quietly, holding her purse in his lap and smiling benignly at her from time to time. Officer Juno had stuck around to brief the social worker and waited to get a report after the examination, but after that he had left. Amy mentioned to him that she had seen her car was parked in her apartment's parking lot, and he wanted to go back and have a look at it, and then he had other work to do. She wasn't the only one who required police attention in the South Bay that day, but he said he could check in with her in the morning. Besides, if there was anything else that he needed to know, the social worker or the doctor would let him know. Tubbs was more than happy to sit with Amy, but it was getting late and both of them were hungry. The thought of food felt strange to Amy, and while she was hungry, she also wanted to take a shower. Tubbs had called Ed Shoup and explained what was going on and where he was. Ed had been very sympathetic and had even agreed to go over to Amy's office himself to put a sign on the door for her clients. She didn't keep client numbers in her phone as a personal policy, so she couldn't call anyone to cancel or reschedule her appointments, and even if she did have the numbers in her phone, she wasn't sure who all was scheduled for the week. She kept all that information in her client appointment book, and they had stolen that. Amy and Tubbs were sitting silently when a woman about the same age as Amy, whom they had not met yet, came in and introduced herself. "Miss Gonder, my name is Naomi Sondam. I'm the director of social work for this hospital. Please let me begin by offering you my complete sympathy and condolences for the horrendous experience you have had. We see a number of rape cases here every day, but this is one of the most brutal attacks I have ever encountered. I cannot pretend to know everything you must be feeling and thinking right now. I can tell you things are going to be difficult for some time, but eventually they can get better. Is this your father?" Naomi nodded towards Tubbs, who had tears welling up in his eyes. "No, I am not her father, but if I were, I'd be very proud," Tubbs answered her. Amy began to cry. Naomi pulled a small packet of tissues from her pocket and extended it to Amy. "Miss Gonder, please call me Amy." "Amy, I have been in contact with Officer Juno. Your tablet was recovered from your car, but the other missing personal items were not there. Due to the nature of the crime, it is the recommendation of both myself and Officer Juno that you not stay in your apartment for a while until there's more information. Officer Juno, is looking for a suspect for questioning, and I understand this suspect is known to be dangerous. Do you have a friend or family member you can stay with for a while? Even if the situation were different, I understand you live alone, and being alone at a time like this can be very challenging." Naomi's expression was sincere. Amy began to cry harder. Tubbs answered for her. "Yes, she has some place to stay." Tubbs wrapped his arm around Amy's shoulder and pulled the woman close to his side protectively. "Thank you. Amy, are you comfortable staying with Mr. Tubbs?" Naomi asked. "Yes, thank you," Amy replied. Because if you do not have somewhere to stay, I have a referral for a safe house, but it's in Contra Costa County, and they do not accept pets," Naomi continued. "No, it'll be fine. I have a spare room in my home, and my wife can take some Zyrtec," Tubbs declared definitively. Amy leaned into the largeness of the kind man beside her. Naomi extended her hand toward Amy with a white linen business card. "This is my direct line. Please call me tomorrow morning to check in, or any time you feel the need. They are preparing discharge papers for you right now. If you decide you need the safe house for any reason, do not hesitate to call me. We can arrange transport for you." "No, that's okay. I'm fine to stay with Tubbs," Amy said, drying her tears with one of Naomi's tissues. Naomi smiled weakly. "It was nice to meet you, Mr. Tubbs. Amy, I'm sorry for what was done to you. No one deserves that." "Thank you." Naomi turned and left the room. Tubbs held Amy by the shoulders and bent his head to look her in the eye as he spoke. "Amy, my wife and I have an extra bedroom in our home that was once my daughter's room. You are welcome to stay as long as you need to. Plus, your kitty will be very happy because it's an Eichler, so she can go outside any time she wants without really going outside. You'll both be safe. I think you and my wife will get on quite well. Maddie's been doing charts for people as a hobby for years. She'll like having someone to talk to. I've already talked to her about it all earlier. The room is ready for you." Amy smiled through her tears and hugged Tubbs. "Thanks, Leon. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it." Tubbs smiled and hugged her back. No one but Maddie called him Leon, but somehow he didn't mind. A young orderly entered the room with a clipboard full of paperwork for Amy to sign, and she was free to go. Walking out into the parking lot to Tubbs' Silverado, they passed a black four-door Mercedes with a cockapoo barking in the front seat. Amy froze and began to shake. "What's wrong, Amy?" Tubbs asked gently, guiding her past the car toward his truck a few spaces away. "I don't know. The sight of that car makes me feel sick." "Let's just go get Liza and your things and go home. Maddie's making a pot of soup tonight and some homemade bread." "That sounds great, Leon. Thank you so much." "It's truly my pleasure. I hope Juno finds the beast who did this to you. He better find him before I do." Tubbs opened his passenger side door to help Amy into the seat and closed the door once she was buckled in. Back at Amy's apartment complex, things were more busy than they had been before. There were kids in the parking lot playing hopscotch with sidewalk chalk and stones, and a number of older residents were out and about chatting over the barbecue pit. The smell of hot dogs and hamburgers made Amy's stomach growl. First, Leon walked with her over to her car. Amy looked in the window and saw a blood stain on the back seat. She noticed the seat was pushed back farther than when she drove the car. The carpet, that was usually hidden under the seat, still looked new in contrast to the regularly trampled portion, and there was a half-smoked cigarette in the cup holder. Amy didn't smoke. She didn't open the car, just looked through the window. Tubbs guided her from the vehicle compassionately. "It's okay. Juno will figure it out. Let's just go get Liza and your things." Amy nodded and followed him up the 3 flights of stairs where Widow Dwyer was waiting. "Oh my, Amaranth. Well, how are you, dear? Been partying a bit?" she quizzed Amy. Tubbs couldn't believe anyone could be so crass and cruel. "Madam, I suggest you mind your business, and Amy is none of your business," he told the bitchy old busybody. "I don't remember speaking to you," Widow Dwyer replied, bringing her hand to her throat in a melodramatic gesture. "Back off. I think I hear a bottle of vodka calling your name," Tubbs said, bringing himself between the old woman and Amy, as Amy turned the key in her door. Widow Dwyer made a sound like she was surprised, but scuttled back in her unit. Tubbs turned and followed Amy into the apartment. Liza was standing on the chair where Tubbs had been sitting earlier in the day. He went to the kitty and rubbed her ears while Amy started packing up things in the living room. "Amy, leave that. Go pack your bag and get what you need for Liza. I'm pretty sure we have a litter box in the garage, and I can pick up some litter. Just get your things and Liza's food and toys, and I'll clean up the TV in here. Where's your broom?" Amy nodded and pointed to a closet next to the front door, then disappeared into her bedroom. She could hear Tubbs talking to Liza and moving things around. First she pulled the sheets and blankets from her bed and stuffed them in the hamper against the wall. It was a good thing she had recently done laundry. The hamper was empty except for a nightgown and a pair of panties. She pulled some clean sheets from a shelf in her walk-in closet and made the bed fresh. Then she pulled her suitcase out from under the bed and sat it on top of the freshly arranged bedspread. From her drawers and closet she packed 2 weeks' worth of clothes. She didn't know how long she'd be staying with Leon and his wife, but it was early October, and the weather was anyone's guess, so she needed options. Most of her clothes were black, so at least everything matched. Then she went in the bathroom and got her toiletries case from under the sink and filled it with her necessities. There was just enough room in her suitcase to squeeze in the toiletries case. She closed the suitcase, then placed her pillow on top and went back into the living room to gather Liza's tiny kitty things, the books she was using for research currently, and her notebooks. Tubbs had the broken TV upright and out of the way on the TV stand, and all broken pieces swept up. He was arranging the curtain rod back over the sliding glass door. He turned around and smiled at Amy. "Well, they didn't pull the rod out of the wall. It just needed to be put back in place. The TV is toast, but other than that, things in here are A-OK again. Liza approves." Liza was trotting back and forth over Tubbs' toes, meowing happily. Amy smiled and shrugged her shoulders. "I just need to grab Liza's things and a few books, and I'm ready to go. Where's your bag?" "It's on my bed." "Okay, I'll go get that and take it down to the truck. You get the rest of the things together, and I'll come back up to meet you. I don't want that nasty old coot getting at you again. What's her problem, anyway? I have trouble believing you do much partying here." "Oh, her husband died last year, and everyone in the building thinks she did it. She said it was a heart attack, but she's been nosy and rude since the day I moved in 6 years ago. I think she needs a good roll in the sheets or maybe a sedative. Who knows what her problem is?" Amy answered. Tubbs laughed and passed Amy to get to her suitcase. When Tubbs came back upstairs, Amy had Liza in a carrier and all the other items in a medium-sized blue Rubbermaid container. Tubbs picked up the container, and Amy lifted the cat in her carrier and purse and followed Tubbs down to the truck after locking the door. Widow Dwyer attached Widow Dwyer watched through open blinds as the two made their way down the stairs. It turned out Amy and Tubbs were practically neighbors. His Eichler home was located just a couple neighborhoods away from Amy in the Birdland neighborhood. Tubbs explained, Maddie is retired from Ames. Believe it or not, I married a rocket scientist. I was a stay-at-home dad. I started working for Ed years ago after Celia moved away. Amy was surprised. She would never have guessed. Celia was Tubbs' daughter. Celia and I rarely saw eye to eye. I wanted her to follow her passion and go to school for music, but she insisted on agricultural science. Maddie didn't care either way, but I thought it a waste of exceptional talent to not study music. She really was something. Could have been a concert pianist. The last time we spoke, well, it was more yelling than speaking. She had taken a job tracking rainforest insects in agricultural communities in Brazil. I didn't want her to go. It's dangerous down there, but she went anyway, and we haven't spoken since. Maddie talks to her on her birthday and Christmas and sometimes gets a letter, but evidently I'm too overbearing and oppressive. Who knows? Maybe I am. Later tonight or tomorrow I'll show you my workshop. You'll see. Tubbs finished as they pulled in the driveway. A woman about the same height and build as Amy, but with chin-length white hair and glasses, was waiting for them at the door. Amy assumed correctly that it was Maddie. She was smiling and wearing a floor-length skirt with a tropical flower print and a coordinated, loose-fitting, solid-colored tunic. Tubbs smiled back at her and said to Amy while still looking at Maddie, That's my girl there, isn't she pretty? Amy agreed. Maddie was pretty. Tubbs maneuvered Amy's bag from the truck and headed toward the door. Amy followed with Liza in her crate, meowing. You must be Amy, Maddie said sweetly as they approached the door. Please come in and make yourself at home. Amy sighed in relief and smiled back. Thank you. She could smell chicken soup cooking on the stove inside just beyond the center courtyard. Dinner smells wonderful, but if you don't mind, I'd really like to shower before I eat. Certainly. I still need to boil the noodles, and the bread is still too warm to cut just yet. Your room is ready with fresh sheets and towels, and even has its own bathroom. Leon will show you. This must be Liza. Maddie peeked at Liza in the crate. Hello there, Miss Kitty. You can go wherever you want, but please don't be offended if you make me sneeze, Maddie said to the cat. Maddie's allergic, but Celia always had cats growing up, Tubbs explained. Oh, well, I think Liza will probably want to spend most of her time in this lovely courtyard anyway, Amy said. Probably. All of ours always did. Does she like watching birds? I have a feeder over there, and we get a good number of finches throughout the day. Plus, the parrots are known to fly by and perch in the neighbor's magnolia tree over there, Maddie replied. Amy had heard about the flock of Sunnyvale parrots, but had never actually seen them for herself. She was looking forward to it. Follow me, Leon said to Amy. I'll bring the other box in and leave it at your door for when you're done with the shower. Why don't you let Liza look around here in the courtyard until I set the litter box up for her? Amy just nodded and placed the cat carrier on the ground and opened the latch. Liza stuck her head out and looked around before deciding it was safe to come out. She walked the perimeter of the enclosed courtyard, then settled down next to a small koi pond and took a bath. Maddie laughed. That's a good idea, Liza. Mummy needs a good bath, too, Amy said to the kitty. Oh, well, if you're going to take a bath, the stopper for the tub is in the medicine cabinet over the sink. Leon will show you. I think there's some Epsom salts, too. Maddie smiled again and disappeared into the kitchen. Amy followed Leon around through the house to the back left corner and graciously accepted her accommodations. Chapter 6. You Don't Pay My Mortgage. Eberly had refused to speak with Doug the entire car ride back from Buca. Doug and Jack had a particularly embarrassing argument, and the manager had told Doug he was no longer welcome at the restaurant. Eberly almost had told him to leave by himself, but Stephanie took him aside and told him it was okay. They could get together later in the week. She and Jack did not hold Doug's behavior against him. Everything had been fine until the waiter had come by with a dessert tray, and Jack ordered not one but 2 desserts, a slice of cheesecake and tiramisu. Jack had laughed with the waiter, saying he could splurge because all he had ordered for brunch was soup and salad. Under his breath, Doug had said, Yeah, a giant bowl of cream soup and some lettuce with your salad dressing and bread. Eberly had kicked Doug as hard as he could under the table. Brunch had been so pleasant up until this point, other than Doug being distant and inattentive to the conversation. Usually Jack let Doug's rude comments and digs roll off his back as if he didn't hear, but not this time. It had come as a shock to everyone when Jack looked at Doug and told him, Go fuck yourself. Doug erupted in a tirade of telling Jack he should be ashamed to speak that way in a family restaurant with children seated next to them. However, the mother of the children, seated at the table next to them, a portly woman herself, turned to Jack and patted his quivering hand on the table and told him not to think a thing of it, at which point Doug had asked her if she had just made babies or did she eat them too. Eberly and Stephanie sat in silent horror as Jack actually began to cry. At that point, the waiter ran away and returned promptly with the manager, who told Doug he needed to leave immediately and not return. Doug pushed away from the table and skulked out. Eberly apologized to the woman and her children and hugged Jack and asked the manager if they required he leave as well. The manager said no, but not to bring Doug back ever again to that or any other Buca location. Stephanie then hugged Eberly and told him not to worry. Eberly had opened the small attaché he carried and producing a slender leather envelope, he had pulled out 4 crisp $100 bills, placing 2 on the table where he had been sitting and 2 in front of the mother at the adjacent table before following after Doug, who he found sitting in the Escape with the engine running, waiting for him. They rode back to Doug's downtown Mountain View townhouse in intense silence. As Doug pulled into his parking space, Eberly cleared his throat before he spoke. I should leave and not ever come back. What you did back there was an embarrassment to me and your profession, but since I love you, I'm going to come in and give you a chance to explain yourself. Eberly spoke deliberately while looking at Doug's unmoving profile. Doug let Eberly finish, then turned his hands over in his lap and sucked his teeth before getting out of the vehicle and walking to his front door, leaving Eberly to open his own door for once. Eberly got out and slammed the door of the Escape behind him. Seriously, mister, you are walking a very thin line right now, Eberly said to the back of Doug's head as he unlocked the door. Doug turned to Eberly and looked at him with mild irritation. He agreed his behavior had gotten a bit out of hand, but after the past 24 hours, he really didn't care. He wasn't sure what was going on. He had never felt both so entirely trapped and liberated at the same time. The cognitive dissonance created by Mike and Oleg was messing with him, and whether he wanted to admit it or not, the guilt of what happened to Amy was clawing at him from the inside like a caged animal desperate to live. He spoke flatly to Eberly. Come in if you want, and let's get this over with. Then Doug turned and disappeared into the townhouse. When Eberly walked in, Doug was in the dining room pouring himself a double shot of bourbon. I prefer to have this conversation sober, then you can get smashed all you want after I leave, Eberly announced. Doug took a sip of the drink and swished it in his mouth, then turned to Eberly. You're free to leave. I will do as I please in my house. You don't pay my mortgage. Fair enough, but really, what is your problem? Jack is a good person, and it's not like you're sticking your dick in him. It's not like you live with him. It's not like he's your family. You know, we didn't bring it up over brunch, but Jack's father just died last week. He took a bottle of sleeping pills, and Jack found him when he went over to drop off some begonias for his mother's planter boxes. Can you think of someone other than yourself for once? Jack is big, but he's not that big, and like I said earlier, you've packed on some weight yourself these past few months, so you really should check yourself. Now I'm going to be quiet and give you a chance to explain to me why you've had a bug up your ass all day and why I shouldn't just go upstairs and gather the things from my drawer and not come back. Eberly sat down in the chair Mike had sat in the afternoon before. The sunflowers he had brought in that morning were arranged in a vase on the coffee table, obscuring his face from where Doug was standing in the dining room. Doug downed the shot and poured himself a second before sitting on the couch, on the side farthest from where Eberly was righteously seated, in the same place where he had been instructed by Mike and Oleg. He sat his drink on the table in front of him and sighed deeply before looking to Eberly and telling him everything that had happened the day before, including how the rats were left by Alex. He stopped for a moment after talking about leaving Amy's apartment to gauge Eberly's reaction. Eberly had a complete look of terror on his face. You can leave and never come back if you want, but please don't tell anyone, if not for my sake, for Galina's, Doug told Eberly. Eberly began to cry. Oh my God, Doug, what are you going to do? You have to call the police. No, I can't. They told me they'd kill Galina, and they threatened Stuart. At the sound of his name, Stuart sauntered down the stairs into the living room and meowed a long, lazy meow. Eberly looked at Stuart. Oh, Stu-Pie, what are we going to do? You can come live with me and Mike, I guess, but your daddy is in a lot of trouble. Eberly looked back to Doug. What are you going to do? I don't know, Eb. I really don't know. Promise me you won't say anything. Eberly got up from the chair and looked around the room before approaching Stuart and rubbing the kitty's ears. I don't know, Doug. I'll keep my mouth shut, but I don't know if I can be with you anymore. I need some time to think things through, Eb said, still rubbing Stuart's marmalade ears. Yeah, I would too, Doug replied, leaning forward in his seat and staring at the palms of his hands against the corduroy of his pants. Eb walked over to Doug and kissed his forehead and whispered, I love you. and I'm going home. Don't call me tonight. I'll call you tomorrow after work." Eberly turned and walked out, stopping just briefly to touch one of the sunflowers on the table. As the door closed behind him, Stuart trotted over to the couch and situated himself in a ball next to Doug. Doug began to cry. Behind the wheels of his classic VW Type 4, Eberly pulled on his driving gloves and sucked back his tears. He looked at himself in the rearview mirror. "Eberly, you need to cut this one loose," he said out loud to himself. Then he looked back to Doug's front door and sighed heavily before backing out of the parking spot and driving off. He got halfway to his Los Gatos flat and decided to turn around and head back to Palo Alto to Stephanie and Jack's. Stephanie and Jack lived in married student housing on Stanford's campus. Stephanie was finishing a doctorate in art history. Jack owned and ran a small flower shop not far from campus. That's where Eb had gotten the sunflowers for Doug. Flowers were how Jack and Stephanie had fallen in love. He had just opened his shop when Stephanie had began her master's at Stanford. She had ordered flowers from the shop for the tables at faculty honors at a faculty honors event, and Jack had delivered them himself because he didn't have a delivery person at the time, and it was his first big order. He fell in love with Stephanie the moment they spoke. Jack had sent Stephanie flowers every day for a month until she accepted a dinner date, and the rest, as Stephanie explained, was history. On first appearance, the couple had nothing in common. But that was, in fact, not true. Jack was a serious art lover and specialized in flowers that were favored as subject matter by famous artists. This time of year, he sourced and carried 15 different heirloom varieties of sunflowers, and all were arranged in greenish two-tone vases like the famous painting by Van Gogh. Stephanie was set to graduate in the spring. Living in married student housing, they finally had enough money saved for a down payment on a modest house. Jack was looking forward to growing his own sunflowers in a postage stamp yard in Willow Glen. As he approached the student apartments on campus, he saw Stephanie and Jack's Bronco parked slightly crooked in an end spot. Eberly was lucky and found a visitor spot nearby. He slipped the driving gloves off his graceful hands and placed them on the dashboard. Then he grabbed his bag and walked over to the apartment's call box and pushed the button for Stephanie and Jack's unit. Stephanie answered the buzzer. "Hello? If this is Doug, go away." "No, Steph, it's Uncle Eb. Can I come in?" "Oh, okay, sure, hold on." Stephanie buzzed Eberly in, and he made his way to their ground floor unit's door. Stephanie was standing in the doorway in her stocking feet, sipping a glass of white wine. Eberly extended his arms in a hug motion as he approached her. "Oh, sweetie, I am so sorry. Can I come in?" he asked as he hugged his niece. "Of course, Uncle Eb, you're always welcome. Jack's taking a nap. Do you want a glass of wine?" she asked as she turned toward the kitchen. "That sounds divine," Eberly answered, following her. "Jack is not taking a nap," Jack said, plodding down the hall from the bedroom, rubbing his eyes and yawning. Eberly could see he'd been crying. "Jack is right here," he finished as he reached where Eberly and Stephanie were standing, but now both with a glass of Sauvignon Blanc. "Jack, I'm so sorry for how Doug behaved. I told him not to call me tonight and that I need to sleep on things." Eberly offered a hug to Jack, who only half-heartedly accepted the contact. "It's okay, Eb. I know I'm not attractive, and I know Doug has a fat issue, but that was just too much today. I don't want to see him for a while. If you're staying with him, I understand. Love is love, but I just can't be around him for a while. Everything is too fresh," Jack intimated while accepting a glass of wine from his wife. "Oh, honey, I completely understand. I need to tell you guys something, but you have to promise not to tell anyone. It's a matter of life and death for Galena. And if he's not careful, maybe Doug too," Eberly explained to the young couple. "Come in here, Uncle Eb. Let's sit in here and you can tell us," Stephanie said over her shoulder, walking into the small living room and sitting in her authentic deco chair that had been in Eberly's family for almost 100 years. Jack situated himself on the floor with his back against the love seat, and Eb sat in the bentwood rocker he had purchased for Stephanie's birthday on his and Doug's last trip to Maine. Eberly took a sip of his wine and explained everything that happened from the time he arrived at Doug's in the morning to when they had gotten back to Doug's place after the incident at Buca. "Oh, my God, Uncle Eb, what are you going to do?" Stephanie was genuinely concerned. The look on Jack's face was another story. "I don't know, Steph. I don't know. I have to sleep on it. In the morning I'll see how I feel, but you can't say anything to anyone, or they might kill Galena. That poor old woman. I thought something wasn't right when Doug told me about her trip, but who am I? Jack got up scowling and headed back for the hallway to the bedroom. Jack, please don't say anything. I understand you don't like Doug. I don't like Doug right now either, but Galena is totally innocent. Galena loves you and Stephanie, Eb said desperately towards Jack's widespread back. I know, Eb, I know, was all he said before disappearing into the bedroom and closing the door. Stephanie looked at Eberly apologetically. It's been a long day. Jack is tired. His mom found a note from his dad yesterday. He had been cheating on her for the last 20 years with her younger sister. Jack is devastated. Eberly gasped. Oh, Steph. I'm so sorry, sweetie. Is there anything I can do? No. Just keep Doug away, and maybe, if you're over in Sunnyvale, pick up a box of C's Nuts and Chews for next time you stop by. Chocolate always cheers Jack up. Anything, Lovey. I need to be down that way on Wednesday for a meeting with an expert anyway. If you want, I can pick up Spice Hut as well and swing by for Din Din Wednesday night. Jack loves Spice Hut. Do you need me to write the order down? 2 orders of chicken lollipop, 1 chicken bikini, 1 chicken korma, 1 sag paneer, 2 orders of rice, 4 orders garlic naan, 1 mango lassi, and 1 iced chai? I don't know how you remember these things, Uncle Eb. Oh, well, any editor worth his weight in salt has a good memory. Accuracy and consistency count for everything. Stephanie got up and hugged her uncle, then picked up the remote and turned on the TV. In the mood for some Antique Roadshow? I have some research to do for my paper and have a few episodes I need to watch for reference points. Divine, Eberly answered his niece and settled back into the rocking chair. Bring that bottle in here, he called after her as she was heading toward the kitchen. You read my mind, Uncle Eb. You read my mind. So, there's a few things here. Use of the term divine has a double meaning or it's a double reference in this novel. So it's talking about the spiritual nature of human beings, right? It's talking about divinity, especially as it is expressed through art, but it's also a reference to the actor divine, and then also the references that have been made culturally. It's not said explicitly, but Mike and Oleg are Russian, and Doug is Ukrainian. Right? And it's left ambiguous as to whether or not Doug is ethnically Ukrainian or ethnically Russian, right? But his mother's nationality was Ukrainian. Her name's Galina, and her friend's name is Anya. Those are both names that are very common within Russian. And this, I was writing this at a time when I was this was my expression of frustration about the apathy and malaise around the annexation of Crimea and the invasion of Ukraine that until now was nobody cared about. So this novel is extremely layered. Poor Jack. Jack and his beautiful flowers. Anyway. Hope you're enjoying the book.